Thank you, Esme. Let me share my screen first. So sometimes the connection here is not as good. I'm currently in Jakarta, so please let me know if you can't really hear what do you call it, some of the things that I'm saying. And I would like to apologize beforehand because like my house is basically next to a mosque and there will be loud noises. So when there's going to be a call for prayer, I'm gonna have to like turn it down a little bit. So let me share my screen. Okay, are you guys able to see this? Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this is based on research, my dissertation research. I'm actually looking at a government-based scholarship program. It's actually a scholarship that I am part of, and I'm sure this is also, we had a lot of like, people coming from Asia, Southeast Asia, from Malaysia, from Thailand, that had some kind of a similar scholarship program. So this might be relevant and this might be quite similar to what you guys are also experiencing. So the title of this study is a top-down approach, bottom-up solution, overcoming challenges of an Indonesian e-government-based scholarship. The scholarship is a PhD scholarship to take study overseas for PhD students. And it's also focusing only for lecturers, whether you are from a private university or from state university. The government will pay for you as long as you have a letter of acceptance and you can just go. So it's, in a way, it's quite easy if you already, if you already fulfilled the requirement of that, you might be able to get it. But in reality, there are so many challenges, and that's what I'm exploring. So let's see. So the overarching question of my dissertation was actually how do the scholarship recipients successfully go through the top-down imposed e-government scholarship process that allows them to receive funding and support to complete their graduate education overseas. The sub-questions that I'm looking at are, the first one, what are the challenges? And the second one is, what are the strategies that were conducted to be able to complete all of these challenges? So let me just go back first. We'll talk about like, in technological determinism, there's this idea of like, if you have the technology, people would easily adapt to it. And sometimes there is a lot of like focus on, getting that technology across, but without actually cultivating the people who are administering it, for example. So it kind of like creates misunderstanding about the role of technology and also confuses attempts to address the world's persistent social program. So a lot of the top-down approach in e-government are usually where e-government the need of the citizens are sometimes guessed rather than being considered after a careful analysis. So it leads to a very poorly performing work system. However, despite all of that, the system still works. So how does this happen? So, the theory that I'm looking at is actually, there is this, workarounds, where that's a bottom-up approach by the users to, solve a lot of the problems that they have. It may not be designed that way, but in reality, this is what's happening, that people have workarounds to, work around a system to make it work somehow. It may be an indicator of what's lacking in the system, but it can also mean that the system is resilient, where it can handle disruption and variation that fall outside the base mechanism or model for being adaptive as defined in that system. Okay, so let's look at the top-down approach in e-government. So as we've perhaps seen from a lot of our studies as well, There's this estimation in e-government success rate in developing countries is that only 15% are actually successful, 35% is partial failure, and 50% are total failure. We're seeing this in Indonesia, and perhaps you're seeing it as well in your country. But then there is this appeal of ICT as a magical solution for all of our problems. We just hope that it can leapfrog our countries to catch up with the rest of the developed world. So there's also this context collision or failure of archetype, where they just assume what works in the United States, for example, can be implemented in Indonesia, and it can also work because it works there. Why shouldn't it work here? So there's a lot of this context collision. So the scholarship that I'm looking at is the Directorate General of Higher Education scholarship. It shifted from, traditionally, we usually would send the application through posts, but then it shifted to the online process in the hope, in the idea that it would, sorry, it's going to take, hang on a second. Okay, so there's this idea by the Directorate General of Higher Education to implement this e-government platform using the e-government platform. So then, Indonesia is like one of the largest, if not the largest archipelagic country in the world. And to have this online solution where people can just submit things online would make it so much easier. So then people would not have to travel to Jakarta. So that was the idea. The idea is great, but in the implementation, there are a lot of setbacks. So let me just define what both workarounds are, etc., etc. So what do I look at? So I was looking at 259 scholars, which is a cohort of 2004. We all live abroad to study in 2014. And I have this community of scholars from a list of documents that were provided for me, and I was able to identify each one of them. So from that 259, I actually looked at about 17 people that I actually interviewed in two sets, like earlier, and the last one was in two rounds, sorry. That was like in 2017, and the last one was actually in January 2021. So I was trying to look at how, the progress of their scholarship. There are several criteria that I looked at when I'm determining who to interview. So thankfully, I'm happy to say that based on gender, since we're talking about gender, about half of the population that actually accepted in this scholarship are actually women. So woohoo, this is really definitely great for us. So there's not much, there's not like gender discrimination when it comes down to the receiving of the application. And then, however, there are only 65% that comes from private universities, and while the majority, or 3/4 of them, are actually coming from the state university. So still there's this, more support for the state universities. So these are the countries where they actually go to study, with the majority is actually in Japan, followed by United Kingdom. So I look at the study and what have I found? So I look at the challenges that are there. I found that there are like 5 types of challenges overall, based on the 17 interviews. Based on the interview to 17 scholars. So the first one is actually technical. So it has to do with like the design or maintenance issue and how it is being created, that scholarship program in itself. So it may not, as I mentioned to you guys before, sometimes like they're taking like an e-government program that actually works in a developed country and implemented in the context of Indonesia. So sometimes there are challenges where it doesn't really work in Indonesia's context. And then another technical problem, another technical challenges would be the bugs. Oh, there are plenty of bugs that are there. It makes it even more problematic because there is no help desk to help people, like, resolving all of these bugs, this issue with the bugs. So that's the first one. That's the first challenge. The next one, which is a majority of them, is actually the bureaucratic challenges. So we see that there are so many denial of problems by the administrators. There are so many delays, something that should be done like in about, for example, they have about 2 weeks to submit the application. But in reality, there's only about 3 days to submit the application, while the 11 other days is just, the website is just not open. Non-responsive, when people go contact them, they just like not replying to any emailings, again, because there is no actual help desk. There are a lot of missing documents. There are unclear acceptable processes. So people don't really know what are they supposed to do. When there are delays, when it's being responsive, they're also thinking like, okay, should I go to the office to get responses? Is that what I'm supposed to be doing? So you have a lot of people who are coming from another island to go to Jakarta to get things sorted out, and they would go back and forth like 6 times or more. So it's really quite expensive when it comes down to this, when the idea was to make it easier for people who are from even the periphery to be able to apply to the scholarship. Okay. There are sometimes like requirements that just sometimes don't really make sense. Some people would accept letter of acceptance only from the international office, while in reality that university only have letter of acceptance from their professor. So there's all of these requirements that are not really good. So there's also non-official services. There's also unclear personnel, who to contact. People don't really know. There's also potential corruption practices where people, kind of like pay. There's a lack of procedure. People don't really know where to go. Despite having this scholarship that has started in 2008, there's still this lack of procedure. Every year, it just changes. There's a lot of mistreatment or misuse of power by those who are in the administrators. We would see people who are getting told off or being told off, like, how come you can't do this? Something as simple as this. Are you sure you want to do your PhD when you can't really do this really simple administrative stuff? So there's also the lack of integration. Let's say, for example, from this point, like in the Directorate General of Education, you don't really know of where the documents is supposed to be going. They don't really have an actual integration. So, and it also, even like on the website itself, there's also a lack of integration between each website. There's also non-compliance from external parties. Of course, like, if the Directorate General of Higher Education wants to have a certain format, doesn't mean that like the other parties should comply to it. So we have all of these, non-compliance that makes it more difficult. And then there's also gaps where, again, there's gaps of the center versus the periphery, such as like the digital divides and all that. There's also knowledge gaps. Things that we assume, for example, if you've been overseas, you know that you need to get visa. You know that if you want to study overseas, you need to get student visa. For many people, they do not really have, knowledge in all of those things because perhaps they've never been there, right? So the next one is the financial. That's definitely really is expensive. The high cost of travel. Can you imagine if you have to pay like for tickets to go to Jakarta like 6 times in a row? So it's just doesn't really make sense. So there's this high cost of travel. You need to have money in order to do this, unfortunately. And there are a lot of like pre-application costs that are not covered in the scholarship. Like visa application is definitely not covered. Like TOEFL, etc. Those are not covered. And then there's also overhead costs that are not covered in the scholarship. Some overhead costs can include, for example, if you have library fees, that are not covered by the scholarship. Now, the thing with this is, the problem is you're not allowed to find other sources of funding. And this is what makes it even more difficult. You can't work, you can't get scholarship. You need to finish, but you don't have any financial means to complete all that. So that's another issue. Then there's also the late disbursement, which is notorious for that. And there's also insufficient living costs for family. Then there's another challenge, which is the cultural challenge. There's also this context collision. There's lack of trust with the system or with the government. And there's also this expectation that when you do this, you need to follow up in person, when you're still supposed to have this online system to make it easier for you without being there in person, which is definitely going to be costing a lot of money. And then another issue would be like, say, for example, during the interview, there would be like personal questions that are not supposed to be given out. But of course, sometimes in Indonesia, personal questions is what people would be asking for. Okay, so what are the, what do you call it, solutions? Okay, I'm 1 minute out of time. Hang on a second. Okay, what are the workarounds? First one, you have to have technical mastery, or you have to have access to technical help. So that's the first of the workaround. Let's say, for example, I don't know how to solve this problem. Your peers might say, hey, contact this personal A to get this done. So you have to have that technical mastery. The next one is street level bureaucracy. We see a lot of, like, with scholars, they would have people on the inside to help them out. Like, you know, well, I have friends inside who can check the progress of my application. The next one is social capital. Some people who are from out of the city, they would be, you know, asking their peers who are living in Jakarta to ask, hey, can you check with my application progress since you live in Jakarta? The next one is financial capital. A lot of people need to, some of them sold their houses, some of them, borrowed from banks, from their family, etc. Now, this is also related to the facilitation or support from external parties. Some are quite, lucky in the sense that the government and the destination is actually giving them subsidies. And, you know, they would be like subsidizing, since you are receiving like really less than the poverty line, we're going to give you something. Or like, you know, you have like their university would still pay them, help out with the expenses. Now, this has to do also with rule violation. Rule violation is, you know, you're not supposed to be accepting other scholarships, but you have to. So people would, like, you know, violate that rule. You're not supposed to be working, but you have to, because like that's how you can pay for this, for your study. And also, you're not supposed to be giving bribes, but you have to, because if you don't do that, you won't get things done. Okay. And number 7 is the issue of persistence. Persistence is basically, you just hang in there. So let's say, for example, like, okay, you just have to wait. You just have to continuously persist. And that's magically, sometimes things just get solved. Okay, so that's like my first and second questions. And basically that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anis. And we have a time for one question. This question comes from Dr. Nila Hidayat. From the previous studies that you have observed, which aspect become the biggest challenges in implementing this platform? Any different result based on different types of countries?
Okay, what are the biggest challenges? All of them are actually major. But what I found out is like bureaucracy is definitely a big challenge. If you don't have people on the inside, it's going to make it difficult. If you cannot, if you cannot, you know, try to take their hearts, like, you know, sometimes you just need to appeal to them, like, hey, I'm having issues. Hey, I'm having this and that. And like, you know, they might pity you and they might help. So the solution is sometimes you have people on the inside, you have these people in the bureaucracy who can get things done for you, who can like overcome the system, who can bypass the system. You know, you're not supposed to be doing this. And, you know, the system is supposed to be perhaps working on its own smoothly. But in reality, even though you have all of this technology, the one who is controlling it, the one who isn't saying yes, the one who is allowing all of these things are still the people. So that's kind of like the biggest challenges, I guess, with this. Like, you know, you have all of these online systems. It's supposed to be making it easier for you. But if the people who are in the bureaucracy refuse to use this online system, so I'm going to, you know, I'm also talking about the persistence of paper. They kind of like refuse, like they just don't want to use this system. Like they would just say, okay, just send it to me. You have to come in person and send me the application. You have people in the administration who are doing that. So like I mentioned to you guys before, the technology is there, but the bureaucracy, if they refuse to use it, it's really challenging for the people who are trying to apply. Any different results based on different types of country? Unfortunately, I'm only looking at one country. I'm also, you know, quite interested if anyone from other countries would want to look at their scholarship, what do you call it, the e-government based scholarship as well in their country. Perhaps we can, what do you call it, collaborate and discuss that in the future for what is called it, for future potential work.
Yes, definitely very exciting, Anis. So, like, thank you very much